Suaranya nggak ada, Maggie?
Yeah, with no sound.
Welcome. Welcome and good day to everyone. My name is Min Kuok Lim. I'm the advisor for communication and information for UNESCO's office in Jakarta. Thank you so much for joining us at this Asia Pacific Regional Forum for World Press Freedom Day. This event is part of the Global World Press Freedom Day celebration and is being broadcast live online. The theme for World Press Freedom Day this year is Information as a Public Good. It serves as a call to reaffirm the importance of cherishing the information as a public good and exploring what can be done in the production, distribution, and reception of content to strengthen journalism and to advance transparency and empowerment while leaving no one behind. More specifically, we will look at the issues from three perspectives: the viability of media and news organization in this day and age, the transparency of online platform and how it impacts journalism, and finally, the link between media and information literacy in countering disinformation and hate speech. We have here today 6 amazing speakers to share with us their experience from India, Indonesia, Myanmar, New Zealand, South Korea, and Thailand. We also have 3 wonderful moderators, Ms. Vicheka from Cambodia, Ms. Joanne Ting from Malaysia, Ms. Amalia Kabusau from the Philippines, to help introduce these speakers and also to help us ensure a lively discussion. Our rapporteur today is Ms. Therese Torres, Director of Research and Policy with AIJC based in Manila. I'm sure you'll agree with us that this is a very diverse group of experts that we have today representing the region. The goal of this virtual forum is to generate ideas and to spark discussions. It is reflected in the way that we have designed this session, and there will be 2 speakers in each of the session, and they will have a moderated discussion, and finally we will end with some Q&As from the audience. And at any one time, dear audience, feel free to post your questions in the chat box that you can see on your screen right now. And feel free to address it to a specific speaker. That would help a lot for our moderators as well. And if you feel like tweeting, the hashtag is Press Freedom and World Press Freedom Day. They are already becoming a trending topic and will continue to do so as we move towards World Press Freedom Day on the 3rd of May. Therefore, without further ado, I would like to welcome our first speaker, and to open the event for us is Mr. Shigeru Aoyagi, the Director and Representative for UNESCO's Asia and Pacific Regional Bureau for Education in Bangkok, to give us the opening remarks. The floor is yours, Mr. Aoyagi.
Thank you, Dr. Lim.
Recording in progress.
Excellencies, distinguished speakers, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to deliver the opening remarks for the Asia Pacific Regional Forum on World Press Freedom Day on behalf of UNESCO. With UNESCO's specific mandate to promote the free flow of ideas by word and image, the organization has been a defender of freedom of expression and the press freedom since the end of World War II. The World Press Freedom Day has its origin in a UNESCO conference in Windhoek, Namibia in 1991. The Windhoek Declaration was the first of its kind to endorse the link between press freedom and the democracy. As a result of the conference, international solidarity, for the first time, set the wheel in motion for press freedom that pushed forward with a free, independent, and pluralistic media. Freedom of expression is a fundamental human right enshrined in Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Windhoek Declaration consequently encouraged governments around the world to make press freedom legally binding. Today, 30 years have passed, and across the world, journalism is under fire. While more individuals have access to content than ever before, the combination of political polarization and technological change have facilitated the rapid spread of hate speech and unverified fake news, often leading to disproportionate restrictions on freedom of expression. In an ever-growing number of countries, journalists face physical and verbal attacks that threaten their ability to report news and information to the public. In Asia and the Pacific, journalists are facing an increasingly hostile working environment as the democratic space continues to shrink. Women journalists are particularly subjected to harassment and threats, especially online. No journalist should fear reprisals for doing their work. Their courage is inspiring, and I'd like to honor local journalists, in particular in Myanmar, for their contributions in the country's continuing quest for freedom and democracy. We are pleased to have today in our panel Mr. Sue Win, an esteemed journalist, human rights defender, and editor-in-chief of Myanmar Now, who received a few days ago the 2021 Shorenstein Journalism Award. UNESCO remains committed to defend press freedom, and we urge the authorities to allow all the journalists and the media workers to exercise their profession freely and in safety. Ladies and gentlemen, to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the Windhoek Declaration, we are gathered today to return to the roots of World Press Freedom Day by looking at contemporary issues for freedom of expression, access to information, and the public service role of journalism within the changing communication ecosystem. For the past 30 years, technological progress has reshaped the global media landscape. The digital age has rapidly expanded people's access to information. Throughout Asia and the Pacific, the number of active social media users accounts for over 40% of the total population. At the same time, competitions from internet companies have caused massive losses of advertising revenue for media outlets, and conditions have significantly worsened due to the economic impact of ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Such pressures threaten editorial integrity and media's independence as a public service. This comes with increasing concerns over the weak transparency and the accountability of internet companies. At the same time, we also witness the spread of disinformation, misinformation, and hate speech, inciting misunderstanding, confusion, discrimination, and even violence. Therefore, the role of journalism in producing verified information in the public interest is more than ever important. Amid this public health crisis, professional media workers everywhere significantly contribute to the public understanding of the pandemic by making overwhelming and highly complex flows of information more accessible, understandable, and reliable. But ensuring the survival of the news media requires also an effort from the consumers of media and the information. It's only when people are empowered through sustainable media and information literacy program that the value of information as a public good can then be permanently protected and promoted. Dear participants, this 30th anniversary of the Windhoek Declaration is a great opportunity to call for an ecosystem in which journalism can flourish. And it is equally important to promote such an ecosystem in a way to sustainably ensure a functioning, free, independent, and pluralistic media so that the spirit of the Windhoek Declaration can be upheld. With these brief remarks, I wish you all a very productive and fruitful forum. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aoyagi, for your remarks and for setting up the stage very nicely for our discussion today. So now, let us move on to our first session. For this session, I would like to welcome the moderator, Ms. Amalia Cabusao, the editor-in-chief for Mindanao Times in the Philippines. She will be moderating the session and also be introducing the speakers for us. Over to you, Amalia.
Thank you very much, Ming. The media is in an environment that is increasingly competitive. It is simultaneously affected by the internet giants, political pressure, the COVID-19 public health crisis, and its accompanying economic recessions. Indeed, the viability of media remains a major challenge for information to serve as a public good, both from an economic point of view and in broader terms. In recent years, advertisement revenues have shifted from legacy media to online platforms. Public service broadcasting has been subject to increasing budget cuts, and consumers' willingness to pay for quality media content has, with few exceptions, decreased due to pandemic-caused poverty, as well as the incorrect assumption that quality journalism can be accessed free of charge. At the same time, journalists and media workers who play a crucial role in the production and sharing of quality and reliable information, thereby contributing to the free flow of information and ideas, are increasingly working under precarious conditions, especially freelancers. This context increases the risk of media being captured by different powers: political, economic, religious, and, well, ideological. Today, we are very fortunate to have with us two speakers who will bring different perspectives on the issue of media viability. Allow me to introduce our speaker. The first one is Dr. Peter Thompson, Associate Professor, Teherenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. Peter Thompson is an Associate Professor in Media and Communication at Victoria University of Wellington, Teherenga Waka, in Aotearoa, New Zealand. He is a founding co-editor of the Political Economy of Communication Journal and co-vice chair of the IAMCR Political Economy section. Peter has published extensively on media policy issues in New Zealand and co-founded the Better Public Media Trust, an independent NGO which advocates for public service media policies. Our next speaker is Mr. Sue Win, Editor-in-Chief, Myanmar Now in Myanmar. Sue Win is the Editor-in-Chief at Myanmar Now, an independent news agency that produces features and investigations in both Burmese and English. As a former 7-year political prisoner during the military regime, Sue Win has deep understanding of the country's troubled past and the need for democratic change. Prior to joining Myanmar Now, he worked for the exile-based Irrawaddy magazine. He holds a master's degree in journalism from the University of Hong Kong, and is a recipient of Presidential Certificate of Honor for Social Service through Journalism in 2016. The European Union's Schuman Award for Human Rights in 2017, and Ramon Magsaysay Award for Emergent Leadership in 2019. He is recently the recipient of the 20th Schornstein Award presented annually by Asia Pacific Research Center. Let us all listen to our speakers talk about issues on the Asia Pacific region under the session's theme of media viability. May we first call on Dr. Thompson?
Oh, good afternoon, everybody.
Afternoon.
I need to start really by declaring a couple of significant privileges. Firstly, because I'm honoured to have been invited to participate in this event and to share the platform with esteemed colleagues such as Sway Win. But I'm also very privileged because of course I live in Aotearoa, New Zealand, where we have the rule of law and civil rights, which are for the most part respected, and where the news media, for the most part, function reasonably well to inform citizens and uphold democracy. And also because we have a government that took seriously the warnings of the scientists and moved quickly to control COVID-19. So I guess you could say we've got it lucky. If I speak out and I criticize the government's policies or I criticize the media corporations, I don't go to bed at night worrying whether I'm going to be arrested, whether I could be persecuted, assaulted, even assassinated. So that's why I'm speaking from a position of privilege. Nevertheless, I have to be a little pessimistic. I think I'm going to share a screen. If that will come up. Oh, maybe I can't share the screen. That's fine. I'll talk about three issues that I think are important. Three big failures that I think are threatening the the viability of democracy. And the first one is the state. And I think obviously if the state controls the media, then we automatically raise questions about authoritarianism, the lack of transparency and the potential for the repression of the journalistic fourth estate. Others, of course, I think are far better placed than I am to comment on the specifics of that. But even in New Zealand, there's been a historical reluctance to intervene in the free market or to invest seriously in public service media. In fact, we have one of the lowest levels of investment in public service media in the OECD. So New Zealand isn't the land of milk and honey here. Recent news about government funding, investing in a new public interest journalism scheme, I think is very welcome. But that raises questions as well about whether or not this is in the public interest or whether it's a form of corporate welfare. Then there are failures of the market, and I'm sure I don't need to go into great detail here, but obviously commercial news media focus often on what is profitable, clickbait and soft news rather than holding power to account. The processes of deregulation, financialization of shareholding, and also convergence have intensified competition right across the sector, and they've fragmented audiences. And we see digital platforms like obviously Google and Facebook capturing huge shares of the digital advertising spend, and that renders traditional business models really unsustainable. Now, even in New Zealand, the number of news reporters over the last decade has halved. We've lost 50% of our journalists. And over the last 20 years, the newspaper sector, for example, has lost 75% of its share in the overall advertising spend. So this is pretty much a crisis scenario. And then the third problem, I think, is the failures in civil society itself. And that often means us. In an attention economy, as consumers, we're often very eager to embrace on-demand services and binge watch entertainment, and perhaps too eager to dismiss public service when it's not something that entertains us. And we're too careless in defending our own data. We've allowed our data to be captured by the digital platforms and then employed, even weaponized, against democratic processes. We're too uncritical of fake news, and we're too easily distracted, I think, by cat videos or the possibilities of binge watching, the latest version of Game of Thrones to notice when our civil rights are being eroded. So whilst I'm very privileged, I'm coming at this from quite a critical position. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. May we now call on Swewin, and your questions will later be we have an open forum, so we can ask the questions there. May we now call on Swewin?
Hello.
Hello, yes, Swewin, go on.
Uh, Thank you everyone for inviting me to speak on this panel. As you all know, one of the major actions the military generals in our country took following the military coup is shutting down the independent newsrooms, including Myanmar Now, which I work for. And they also arrested dozens of journalists, including a female colleague of mine. They are all facing bogus charges of instigating the public against the military rule. Their court hearings are taking place inside the compound of the prison in Yangon. All of these actions are meant to hide the various atrocities being committed by the military regime. The assault on the press in Myanmar reaffirms the well-asserted notion that freedom is an essential component of democracy. The military has also blocked internet services so that the citizens can no longer access news and information from the independent domestic and international press. They can no longer share information with each other and also with the news outlets. I believe that in this 21st century, press freedom, internet freedom, and free flow of information, they all have become major pillars of democracy. Their absence is nothing but the hallmark of a dictatorship. Authoritarianism is a major assault on the humanity and also on the democracy. But in addition to authoritarianism, we are also concerned about the rising racism and racial and religious narrow-mindedness. So I think in the newsrooms, particularly in conflict countries like ours, the media have to make sure that we approach the news from the broader perspectives of the humanity and the truth. So only then we believe that we will be able to contribute to the growth of democratization. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Swebin. We still don't have a question, so I would like to ask the first question. So, I was really struck by Swebin's statement that as in the broader media should look at the broader perspective of humanity and truth, you know, to be able to contribute to the growth of the community. Do you have what's this an example of a success story or something that we can able to hold on to? Maybe ask Dr. Thompson if how you did that in New Zealand, or were you ever able to look at that kind of situation? Do you ever felt like that? And Swebin, can you also share with us some incidents maybe that you can think that you have succeeded somehow in pushing for more what's this how you strengthened media viability in Myanmar? Sure.
Shall I speak
Yes,
first?
yes, please. Okay.
I'm certainly not taking precedence over Sway. His experience on this issue, I think, is far more important than mine. I think one of the big problems we had in New Zealand is that during the 1980s, we had effectively a neoliberal coup. And nobody talks about this as a coup, but it was a capture of the state by effectively the Treasury and big business. And we went further down the neoliberal route of deregulation and privatization than almost any other OECD country. So we're fighting back really from a very, very hollowed out public sector. And although it's been very much 2 steps forward and 1 step back, I mean, we've made some progress. There's now an indigenous Maori television service. And I think that provides an incredibly important, bulwark against the mainstream media. So I'm not going to take too much time in talking about that, but that's an incredibly powerful resource, both for the indigenous community, but it also provides a primarily non-commercial approach to broadcasting, and sets up a model that's then very difficult to dismiss as unsuccessful. Because that's been done, it's also now very difficult to dismantle. So I think I give that as a positive example in New Zealand.
Yeah, wow. Mhm. Thank you very much. Maybe now go on to Syrian.
Our country, has been caught at in so many kinds of conflicts. So you can imagine, sometimes how awkward it is for us, to report without offending a certain political party or ethnic group or a certain ethnic group. So sometimes our reporting intentionally might offend the majority Buddhists. Sometimes it might offend all the Muslims, or sometimes it might offend those in the power. Sometimes it might offend those who are resisting against the establishment through the end struggle. We do offend, but then we see a growing realization over time that we are merely sticking to the facts to approach things from the broader perspective of humanity and universal values. I don't think we need certain special set of skills. We just need to stick with the fundamental principles of the media and journalism. The basic values, principles of truth, accuracy. That's all thing. But at the same time, we are also running the risk of sometimes, not putting things into context. We want to get out of the problem. We want to get out of the heat. We know this is a very complicated situation. This will create a lot of controversy. That's why sometimes, we will mention, we will use the statements from various parties without putting things into context or in perspective. Sometimes I think we might intentionally do it because of a character like Donald Trump. He makes a lot of news. In conflict societies, you can have these kind of characters. So we will merely churn out a number of stories based on this person's, continuous statements and posts, etc. Actually, without describing them in the proper context. We know actually, our story will create a lot of traffic. People will like it. People will make a lot of comments actually. This will be at the top of our website or traffic actually. We know actually, So even if we may be sticking to the truth, even if we may be trying to make that our stories are accurate to the maximum level, but if we fail to put things in proper context and in perspective, we are not contributing. I feel we are doing a disservice to the readers and to the community. So there are two aspects. If we keep doing our job professionally, even the conflicting parties will begin to accept our work as a professional product. But it takes time actually, so it takes time. So second thing is we should not have the psychological burden of being caught at any controversial issue actually. Sometimes we are driven by this fear and then trying to get away actually from the contextual reporting, because we know that it will draw heat. So we have to put things into context and in perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Swin. Now we have a question from the group. No? The question is: do the speakers think there are possibilities of New Zealand media collaborating with the Myanmar media that will help to improve viability of the media for both countries? Maybe sharing of whatever skills, experience. Yeah, do you think that's possible, Swin?
I don't know, but I think, we can benefit, in many ways, because the news zones are not just comprised on just editors and reporters. We need more technological input, in the 21st century. 20 to 30% of the newsroom productivity is now linked with the technological innovation in the newsroom, in which area we remain very weak, given the fact that we have left behind many other countries, in all the areas. And also, they can also share their experiences, how do they, how do they grapple, or how do they report, or, the kind of racism, which hit the New Zealand, a few years ago, etc. Actually,
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Swin. Uh, yeah, can we hear from
Yeah.
Sir Thompson? Yeah.
Yes, I'm happy to comment. I think what we don't have is a good institutional connection with the news media in other countries. Because of all the cuts in New Zealand news media, I mean, we barely have any international reporters. I mean, most of the time when our news media can afford to send somebody overseas, it's for an All Blacks rugby game. For regular international news, we're very dependent on the major news agencies. So I actually think this is an interesting question, because possibly other countries would be in a better position to collaborate internationally. But for news media that are often looking for stories, I think it would be really, really interesting for a news media outlet in New Zealand to accept copy from an external stringer based overseas. So if you can't publish the news in Myanmar because of the authoritarian junta, then why not write those news stories and email them or send them through social media to news media overseas? And that might not just be New Zealand. I think that I can't speak for them because I'm an academic, but I think it would be quite interesting to contact some of the news media. And there are some new independent outlets. Thinking of Newsroom, which is independently run, a very, very small news service. And if someone was sending them copy of first-hand stories from what was really going on in Myanmar, I think there could be some interest in publishing that material. So that would be a possibility, I think, but it depends on how it's set up, and obviously there are logistical problems. Possibly if you're going to send video and other kinds of material, it could get complicated. The technology could be a challenge there.
Yeah, thank you. I think Swin, that would be a very good, a very interesting track that we might be able to think of when we talk of publishing outside of Myanmar, especially on issues that we feel that a lot of people should know. No? I'd like to know what are the main areas that we should focus on in the Asia Pacific region in terms of media viability. If there are issues that you think we should focus on in the Asia Pacific region. So,
please, sorry.
okay. Can you answer that, Sir Thompson?
I can have a go. Well, when I started, I identified 3 spheres where I think there are problems. But to develop that idea, I think those 3 spheres of the state, the market, and civil society, the relationships between them are different in different countries, and so I would absolutely hate to start giving advice based on New Zealand's experience, because it might be completely inappropriate and inapplicable to countries that have different political, economic, and cultural arrangements. But I think what we could look for is ways of promoting, where it's possible, investments in public media. And you can't argue for that if you've got a military government. They're not going to do it. So in New Zealand, I think that's a big campaign that we've been organised in. But I think what we could do is work to try and identify where the spaces are, where the opportunities are to push back against state power, corporate power. Where is the flexibility for advancing the interests of public interest journalism? And I think there are some spaces growing. I think there's some similarities in different countries here. For one thing, I think we've started to ask much more critical questions about the big media platforms like Google and Facebook, about how they use our data. Even in Australia, although they're doing it for the wrong reasons, I mean, the government has recently moved to oblige social media to contribute to the regular news media. Now, there are some fish hooks in that policy, but the point is that that's a government that's really committed to free markets, and now it's agreeing to move in and regulate the media. I don't think they would have imagined this 20 years ago. So that's a move, that's a shift. It's quite a significant shift. The legitimacy of state intervention in those places where the state can be trusted to operate at least some of the time in the public interest. I think that's a really interesting opportunity to explore.
Yeah, that's yeah, Swibin, can you say something about it? I mean, in terms of we're talking, Sir Thompson was talking about markets, um, and what about the technology, technological gaps that's present in Myanmar and in other countries in the Asia Pacific, like.
Yeah, this is quite a difficult topic, actually, quite a difficult topic. For example, for Myanmar now, which I am working for, we rely on international donor funding to run our newsroom. But since like 2 years ago, we started trying to generate revenues from the Facebook, from the YouTube, and from the website. So things have started moving a little bit, actually. And then we got the coup. So revenue generation is a new thing, actually, in the Myanmar, because the country just opened 10 years ago. The country has been without the independent press for like 4 or 5 decades. So many things are new to us. But starting 4 or 5 years ago, the local media outlets has started trying to generate revenues from various ways, actually, And then we created a reader contribution program, actually, on our website. So whenever we publish an interesting investigative story, we receive a lot of money, sometimes up to $30,000 a month, actually, Sometimes we are overwhelmed with these financial contributions via mobile application apps. We are so much overwhelmed that all these mobile application apps have reached their limit. Nobody can send any more money to us within a period of 24 hours. They got to wait. They got to queue up. So that sort of thing. So I think, we are so, in this 21st century, actually, there is a lot of news. There is a lot of material or text for news in the social media. And also, there are a lot of things happening actually, you know, a lot of interaction actually, a lot, you know, so in their communities and, you know, at the regional level, etc. So there are a lot of things to report, all right. But I think sometimes we are swept away by these endless, continuous news event. So we become out of control. We are just actually passive, you know, reporters actually, you know. So that we try to get out of this flow of information, you know, different statements, so many kinds of statements coming from the government, coming from the political parties, coming from the ethnic groups, so many things actually, you know. So we are merely driven by this flow of information, and then we try to we try to work out what are the interesting topics for this month. You know, what are the underreported issues we should concentrate our efforts on? You know, so even if we have 20 or 30 reporters, we always try to save half of the human resource to do something, you know, to focus on a topic which are not easily found in the social media or in any sort of statements. You know, what are the issues we can dig into? So I think if we really put our efforts into this kind of active reporting, I would say active reporting, you know, enterprise reporting, then this is the value. This is the value of our work. For example, writers or New York Times, they cannot just keep reporting what's happening on a day-to-day basis. They got to give you something so precious actually, you know, something which they have to put a lot of energy actually, something like that actually, you know, which takes time actually, you know. So we got to give some extraordinary products to our readers, something they can appreciate that we are working so seriously actually, you know. This will be good for commercialism as well, and also for the trust of the readership in our work. So I can only talk about the viability of the media because only from that perspective. Otherwise, some people might be under the impression that, okay, we don't need to rely on any particular outlet which is charging us, which is asking us to donate some money. We don't need to, because if we don't read this outlet, then we can look at other outlet, wine call, that sort of thing actually, you know. So I think it is quite important that we also do very active reporting on certain issues.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Swebin. We have another question from our audience. Okay. How do each of the speakers see the role of traditional public broadcasters as facilitating or hindering media viability in the media landscape of New Zealand and Myanmar? So, yeah. The question is, how do you think, how do you see the role of traditional public broadcasters as
Can I respond?
or facilitating? Yes, yes. Yes, go on, sir.
Well, public media is one of my big research areas, and I'm a major proponent of public service media. I think there are two elements here. One is whether the traditional models of broadcasting are becoming superseded by the new digital media, and we have reports that show, you know, year-on-year declines of public access, but the last big report a year or so ago, commissioned by the Broadcasting Commission New Zealand on Air, found that there was still well over half the population, you know, would access some sort of free-to-air television broadcast, linear scheduled broadcast, virtually on a daily basis. Now that might only be tuning in for the news, but there's still an audience there. And I think the myth that broadcasting audiences have all disappeared and everybody's online is factually incorrect. So I would still say that public broadcasting has a role, but over the next 10 and 20 years, it's going to be a diminishing role. And they're going to have to become multi-platform enterprises. And that does raise some very interesting questions about the shape and the form of public service media in the future. The other aspect to this, and it's something I think we need to be very careful about, and in fact it's very relevant to New Zealand at the moment, is the increasing demands from commercial private sector news media for government support. And what we've found historically in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is that a number of the commercial media outlets push back very, very hard against proposals to invest in public media. And that's partly because we have a contestable funding mechanism for making local content, some of which now goes into news, and there is a new media fund for specifically for public interest news. But because they get a share of the contestable funding, they're very, very reluctant to endorse direct government investment or license fee support for other kinds of specific public media. And I think that's quite a problem, because I think at the center of your media ecology, you're much, much better off if you have at least one or two strong, independent, commercial-free broadcasters or other media operators. If everything's commercial, you will tend to engender a commercial race to the bottom where everybody's chasing the same eyeballs and advertising dollars in a shrinking market. So I think there's still a very, very strong and central role for public service media at the center of the ecology.
Oh, thank you very much, Peter. Suewin, what's your take on the public, broadcasters, traditional public broadcasters?
This question is not very relevant to our country, because all the public broadcasting stations have been controlled by the government, now by the military regime. You know, they are just disseminating just the propaganda. But I believe that in any country, particularly in an age like this, we really need the commercial public service media outlets, you know, because particularly in a country like ours, people will compete a lot for the advertising, you know, advertising market, advertising shares, and also they are also, you know, running the risk of actually compromising their editorial policies, because so many stakeholders were trying to bribe the media. They are bribing the media. For example, we have seen instances of China bribing the media outlets. For example, you publish one of their propaganda articles, you know, and then you get like $1,000, you know, $1,000. So you don't need to publish the pen name actually, you know. Pen name is just a funny, you know, a pseudonym of somebody you don't know actually, you know. You get the easy money actually, you know. So, and then some of the medias who have accepted those money, they complain that we don't want to accept those money, but we are struggling to survive. If we don't accept the money, you know, we might fail actually, you know, fail to exist, that sort of thing. So I believe that, you know, there should be public service media outlets supported by the state, but completely independent of the state influence.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Peter Thompson and Swewin. We are running out of time, and it was a very interesting session. We learned so much from your insights and from the experience that you shared. But there will be another session. So I think I'll have to thank you very much, both of you. And I think I have to pass it on to Vichayka for the second session. Thank you very much, Peter and Suwin.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Emilia. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kanvachaka. I am a journalist from Cambodia and I am a moderator of this session. Now we have the second panel discussion on reinforcing the transparency of online platforms and a central pillar for information to remain a public good. Yes, as the digital transformation continues to change our communication habits, social media and other online platforms have grown to occupy an increasingly large part in our daily communications. But we remain likely ignorant of their inner workings and the anonymized data that could offer the information about the flow of problematic content, such as disinformation or hate speech. Several internet companies have taken measures to counter disinformation and potential harmful content. However, in the absence of comprehensive data or information from these online companies, and the effectiveness of measures to counter such content is an impossible task. For this session, we have two speakers who will bring different perspectives on the issues of transparency of online platforms. First, we have Ms. Sima Mustafa, President of the Editors Guild India. And second, we have Dr. Min Jong Kim, Professor at Hanguk University of Foreign Studies in South Korea. First, I would like to invite our speaker to share about the issues that they think are most important in the Asia-Pacific region under the session's theme of transparency of online platforms. And I would like to invite Ms. Sima first. Yes, Ms. Sima, you have 2 minutes and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, we are in quite a mess, I think, in this region, journalism. But since I have to focus on online, I want to say that anything to do with the media, whether it's electronic, print, digital, social, it has to be steeped in ethics and in responsibility and accountability. Without this, the media is not performing the duty as it is supposed to strengthen democracies and to strengthen the rights of the people. The internet, as we all know, and all of us here know, that it created an amazing space that traveled across the continents. It bridged gaps, it brought in old friends, new friends, etc. And it gave citizens all across the world a voice. And that was an important voice. It's an important voice, it's a direct voice. Unlike the newspapers, which have also retracted, the print media has retracted, and in many cases, particularly in our part of the world, the television media also has abdicated responsibilities and moved away from giving a voice to the most marginalized and the oppressed and the persecuted. So you had the social media that sort of tried to fill this vacuum. And you have Facebook, with about 2 billion a day. You have YouTube, which has 1 billion hours a day, and Twitter and WhatsApp and all the various platforms that you know about. But there is the downside. And the downside is of how these platforms are being used for hate, for abuse, for discrimination, for revenge porn, which is almost now on the verge of eclipsing the good that had come with the rottenness of humankind actually pouring out through the social media and the online platforms. So we are all grappling. We are wondering what we can do. It is an important platform for journalists, regardless of whether we work in print or television. The social media is where we are all present. And unfortunately, because of this rottenness, authoritarian governments across the world are trying to step in and control it by passing laws within the countries, by arresting people for Facebook posts, by having direct interaction with Zuckerberg and with Twitter to pull down posts. Now, what is happening in this process is that the good is being treated as at par with the bad. So if there's a hate abuse, if there's filth, it is being pulled down. Some are being pulled down along with the good, so long as there are many complaints. I think we really need to sit down and look at this very, very seriously, because there is the bad, there is the abdication of responsibility, there is ethics, there is accountability that guides the media across the world and has to be brought to guide the functioning of the social media. But it must not come from the governments. It is right now coming from the governments in different countries which are trying to control this space as well. It has to come from within us. And these people who are running these have to realize that importance, bring together maybe eminent experts nationally, regionally, nationwide, who then, along with them, work out a policy which contains the content without bringing in governments and without controlling the space by regimes. It is a citizen space. It is the strength of the space of online platforms is that it gives the voice to the citizens. So the solution also has to come from within that realm. It cannot come from all these various laws and legalities that governments are trying to bring. I think we really have to stand up on that. And the rest, if there are any specifics, we'll take it up when the questions come. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ms. Simar. I would like to give the floor to Dr. Kim. You also have 2 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Khan. Please let me share my slides first. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Min-Jung Kim. I'm a professor of media and communication at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. It's an honor and a great pleasure to speak to you today on the topic of transparency of online platforms. Online platforms shape both our lives and media ecosystem. Many of us read news online, access digital content, and interact with our friends via social media platforms. And yet, we barely know how the decisions are made. For instance, it is estimated that 500 hours of video clips are posted on YouTube per minute. YouTube removes the most extreme and harmful content according to its content policy. Then YouTube decides which clips are shown to whom. We don't know much about how algorithm works and how the decisions are made. I believe we as a society should have a say. In this session, I would like to address the transparency issue in global platforms as well as domestic platforms. As in many other countries, a few global online platforms are often used in Korea. They are YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And in Korea also has 2 powerful domestic online platforms. They are Naver and Daum Kakao. Both of them play a critical role in disseminating news. So here are the 3 areas that I want to talk about in this session. The first, combating online hate speech and disinformation. Second, the issue relating to the fact that online platforms now have a huge influence on public news consumption. And third, the issue of algorithm ethics and data privacy. So we'll get into the details later, and that's all for now. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kim. And also thank you so much for both speakers for the insightful introduction. I would like to remind for participants who have questions, please type in the chat box and please specify the speaker you would like to ask. Thank you. So since we haven't seen the question, so I would like to have questions for our speaker. The first one I would like to ask, what are the main areas that should we focus on this in Asia Pacific region in terms of transparency of online platforms? Please, Dr. Kim.
Okay, so I go first. Let me share my slide once again. Okay. So let me first talk about our online platforms' effort to combat hate speech and disinformation. So decisions that online platforms make can have a huge impact on human rights. Many of us were aware of the tragedy caused by Facebook's failure to address incitement against the Rohingya Muslim community in Myanmar. So this is a clear example of online platforms not doing enough. Oftentimes, platform companies seem to fail to exercise due diligence. Recently, there has been a small change. A most notable example is Twitter's decision to permanently suspend Trump's account because of the risk of further incitement of violence. Also, last month, Facebook announced that it has taken actions to combat the spread of harmful content like hate speech and misinformation on Facebook groups, and has made it harder for certain groups to operate or to be discovered. Facebook said it will start to let users know when they are about to join a group that has community standards violations. Although more efforts have been made recently, many people still question whether online platforms are doing enough, like exercising due diligence in fighting against hate speech, extremist content, and disinformation.
Yeah, thank you.
And let me,
Yep.
so on the other hand, there's on one side, there is a problem of not doing enough. And I think on the other hand, there's a lack of transparency is a major problem. And so we know some of the content that violate the company's policy are automatically deleted and detected and deleted. So according to the media report that came out last year, especially after COVID-19 outbreak, the number of content moderators went down. In the meantime, the portion of the content for which AI makes a final decision on whether the content should be deleted or not went up. So there is this technology that is in play, and more content are reviewed by the technology only, but we don't know the inner workings of the technology. Platforms also have users flag questionable and offensive content, and there's a review process by content moderators. Again, we don't know the exact and specific standard under which content moderators decide if a certain content is in violation of the company's content policy. Of course, there is a transparency report, but it only gives a snapshot, like how many requests they received and how many have been deleted. So the transparency report talks about only a handful of specific cases that the company is willing to share. Another point that I want to address is that the US companies such as YouTube and Facebook do not respond to local concerns properly. They always say that they have one global policy. So some Korean users criticize that the enforcement of the company policy is inconsistent. And when Korean journalists or Korean users raise a concern over the company's handling of a specific case and ask for an explanation, the typical answer that they get from Google Korea or Facebook Korea is something like, oh, please contact the head office in California. Like, we are in charge of advertising only in this Korea branch. So also, according to a US media outlet, Facebook has 15,000 content moderators who monitor postings that violate Facebook community standard as of early 2019. But Koreans do not know how many are there, if there is any, content moderators who are in charge of reviewing Korean users' posting. So lastly, there is an issue of offshore regulation. Some content that is illegal under Korean law may not violate the platform's content policy, or vice versa. I believe global platforms need to work closely with local government authorities in fighting against hate speech and in combating disinformation and misinformation related to COVID-19. The second issue that I want to address is the role of online platforms in terms of disseminating news. So Korea has two powerful domestic online platforms, Naver and Daum Kakao, that provide news service to the public. So Naver started its news service in 2000, and Daum started its news service in 2003. So major newspapers and broadcasting outlets in Korea give their content to Naver and Daum in exchange of copyright royalty for news articles they produce. The exact amount of the fee the news media outlets get is unknown. Anyhow, Korean users, instead of going to media outlets' individual websites, they go to either Naver or Daum to get their daily news. So this type of news consumption became so common and dominant, so that Naver became the source of the news in Korea. So as the power of these two online news platforms, especially the power of Naver, has increased over the years, politicians, scholars, journalists, citizens have questioned and criticized the standard under which the platforms select and display news on their news service pages. Sometimes the presentation of the news seemed politically biased. In many times, the majority of the news users see, most of the news that users see on Naver and Daum are soft news, entertainment news, and news with sensational and provocative headlines and topics. So confronting the criticism on their news service and with the development of technology, the online platforms started a news recommendation system that is designed to meet individual users' need. In 2015, Kakao launched something called Rubix, which stands for Real-Time User Behavior-Based Interactive Content Recommender System. And Naver launched AIRS in 2019, that is AI-based news recommendation system. So these companies claim that the news editing process done by algorithm is neutral and objective. And they claim that there's no human intervention for specific political or economic forces. But however, there's much discussion now in Korea that algorithm is neither neutral nor objective. And also, many Koreans started to think that these news platform companies must fulfill their social responsibility, and the news platforms should make a conscious effort to restore the public sphere in Korea. The last issue that I want to address is algorithm ethics and data privacy. And there was a very recent incident in Korea that shows these issues clearly. And I will get to this later, as we discuss some specific examples. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. For Ms. Sima, you have the same question. What are the main areas that should we focus on in Asia Pacific region in terms of transparency of online platforms?
I think, there is, I come from a slightly different space, and I think that the solutions have to be at different levels. It's not just Asia specific or just not the US, and it's not just Google or Facebook. These will disappear, more will come because internet is now there to stay and it is being misused. So I think the solution really lies in one, having a worldwide policy, one, two, a regional policy, and three, a nationwide policy. And all addressing the worldwide will, of course, determine some accountability by bringing in a system of ethics which none of them can violate, whether they adjust the algorithms or whether they bring in good experts, but they cannot violate. There has to be zero tolerance for hate and abuse and racism and revenge porn and gender stalking and all the filth. I don't think that anybody will have a problem across the world to say that these are the areas that have to be completely censored, for want of another word, on these online platforms. The second will have to be regional, because every region has its own problems. Like if we see South Asia today, a problem is of speech, a problem is of autocratic governments, it is of harassment, of arrest. So how do they frame their policy in the region, whereby the rights of journalists, the rights of citizens are looked at with a different periscope than the rights of governments, right? It has to be in this manner. And then nation, every nation, every country has its own specifics, which have to be built into this. The problem today is that all these online platforms, because of the confusion, and because the citizens are ranged against governments in some spaces, in several countries, are taking advantage of all that. So when a government pushes them, they go to the citizens. When citizens push them, they go back to the government. But basically, their ties are all, if you take all the successful platforms, they're only functioning with governments across the world. They're having deals which we don't know. There is such an absence of transparency in the dialogue between these owners and between governments across the world. Governments are using this to bring in, as I said earlier, all kinds of rules and regulations in the guise of warning against, of protecting citizens from hate speech and fake news, but actually empowering sections to do the same. So, you know, you have this continuously. I mean, Twitter in India is controlled by various political parties. The citizens barely, they have a say, but when there's a Twitter storm, it is usually politically led. And sometimes it is so full of hate and abuse that it intimidates individuals. Individuals who have no way of protecting themselves, particularly journalists, are intimidated by this complete, what they call trends, but which is actually a trend of complete hate, and it is of intimidation and abuse. So we need to step in. We do, as citizens, need to step in. We have to have a national policy, international policy, and a national policy done by, you know, created by citizens. These guys who are running these online platforms, if they want to restore some level of order and they want to bring in some level of democracy and strengthen rights, they have to have those conversations with eminent persons, with citizens, with different spectrums across castes and categories. You can't talk to one section which is actually persecuting another section. You can't talk to just the patriarchs who are against the women. You can't just talk to a higher caste, which is our problem, which is persecuting the weaker class. So you have to draw, it has to be an intelligent policy. It's not rocket science. It can be done. These people have the money, they have the resources. They have to bring in a system of ethics and accountability. Otherwise, they are creating so much damage, and this damage is going to worsen and destroy our unity and our diversity.
Thank you, Simar. And now we have got 4 questions from participants, and I will ask the speakers one by one. And please keep your answers short if possible. You just take just only 2 minutes for each question. So I would like to ask the first question from participant. The first one is big text, just as Facebook seems to only react when it hurts the bottom line or profit. Both speakers noted that we, the people, should have a say. How do make the big tech listen to us? Please, Dr. Kim.
I think
Dr. Kim? Hello? Can you hear me?
Were you asking for my answer? Oh,
yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't really get
participant.
the question from the audience. I'm sorry. What was the question again?
They explained about the big tech, such as Facebook, seem the only react when it hurts the bottom line. And they also added that both speakers noted that we, the people, should have a say. And then he asked, how do make the big tech listen to us?
Okay. I think I was addressing the issue of combating hate speech and disinformation online. And I think there are, this is a really complicated issue, and everyone should have a role. So the government authorities should have certain roles, and then the public should have certain roles. So if the audience was asking whether the public participation is needed and necessary and are warranted, my answer is absolutely yes. And public need to ask for a clear explanation on companies' content policy and what they are doing to fight against hate speech and disinformation. And I think And there's users flagging the problematic content and harmful content and asking their company to pay more attention to certain types of hate speech that's targeting minority groups, etc. So I think the public participation is really important and needed in this area.
Thank you. Sima?
Yes, so this is about the question about specific regulation or policy to regulate harmful content, especially hate speech and disinformation. So yes, I think the country, India has definitely brought in some laws right now, which a lot of the online news outlets are seeing it as something that will curtail their freedom. So it is these are digital laws which are basically applicable to online platforms, but those online platforms in the Indian context also include some of the major digital papers that are giving an alternative voice, that are speaking out, and who report, as journalists are supposed to report, against the establishment, regardless of who the establishment is. But they're feeling that this is a way to curtail their freedom, and it is a method from the back door by bringing in these rules to ensure that free and fair reporting does not take place.
Yeah, thank you.
So,
And
can I add, because I
Yes,
didn't
please.
answer the audience question.
very short. Yes.
So there is a law called the Act on Information and Communications in Korea. So we have, specific laws and regulations that's designed to address harmful content online. And there are 9 types of information that is illegal under that Act of Information and Communication. But unfortunately, hate speech is not one of them yet. So, inserting someone or defamation of someone is one of the categories that is illegal under the law currently, but hate speech is not. So that's one problem that Korea needs to address, like first passing the law that ensures equality for all citizens, and then move on to the next step.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. Sim, you already answered the next question from our audience. The second question that I'm going to read for you. So for all speakers, so do your country have specific regulation or policy to regulate harmful content, especially hate speech and disinformation? How state work with platform, global and domestic, in this issue? So, Sima?
I just answered that.
Yeah, we just
Actually,
answered
so
that.
I think we both answered that first
Oh.
question. So we can go to the second if you want. How do you see public participation to ensure the online media? Though we've also answered that to some extent. But yes, there has to be participation. There has to be citizens who come in. There has to be, the greater the public participation, the better it is to provide quality information. In fact, today we have what we call citizen journalists in India who are coming out with news as it happens on the field. In the field, they've got their mobiles, they take the videos, and those videos and that information is now being used by the more mainstream newspapers and the media, after, of course, being verified. But they're the first alerts. Earlier, we used to have first alerts as news agencies. Now, citizens on the ground are providing amazing information, which is why I think that this is so exciting. But the bad must not prevail over the good. Otherwise, online and the internet and the online media is giving such an amazing opportunity to young people, and they are coming out first with the news, and they're coming out with videos, which of course, once you check if they're found to be right, often instigate campaigns or get remedial actions, or they trend, as you call, and people are aware that this is happening on the ground, which sometimes the media now, particularly the media now more and more under corporate and government controls, is not being able to highlight or not willing to highlight.
So who should train those sessions to those young people, Sima?
Sorry?
Who should train those sessions to those young people?
Well, this is we are not trying to make them reporters. They're not going to be reporters. These are people who are you have to see it to understand the level of citizens' effort. There are people who are coming on using YouTube and giving us young people and telling us what they think about, say, maybe what we are going through in India right now, the COVID crisis and what has happened. And that starts trending, and people realize that in this little hospital tucked away in a village, there is no oxygen, which we were not even highlighting because we are looking at the national capital of India. So they don't need training. They just, they're just bringing out the news as it happens because it's happening to them. They're witnesses to it. They have a phone, they take a video, they put it out on the social media without any cost and without any problem. So it's amazing the volume as a journalist of so many years. It's amazing the volume of information, and a lot of it good information that is coming out on the online media in our country. It is really what is keeping democracy alive, even as we in the more controlled space of print and electronic media move away from the people's issues into a world of glamour and celebrities and power and riches. It's the citizen journalist who, to a great extent, is doing what the media used to do many, many years ago.
Yep, thank you. Another question from audience to Ms. Simar. How has the editor skill of India represented the interest of local Indian journalists against online platform giants, for instance, in the monopoly of online news by Google or Facebook?
It's interesting because we have a very, very vibrant Indian media. We have hundreds and thousands of newspapers and magazines, and I don't know how many channels. And you find that the competition is between them and Google and Facebook, not by the local journalists. Like I started after many, many years in print and also in television a bit. I started an online paper. A lot of senior journalists have started online papers because that's the space which we can afford, and where we do not have those kind of requirements which will come in the way of reporting freely. Though of course the space is getting more and more stifled now. So I think we don't need to represent the interests of the local Indian journalists, the individual journalists, the small journalists, the small network, because he or she is on using the online space and the freedom it carries with it at one level. The people who are really competing with Google and Facebook are the big power media. It's the big power media in our country. And they are having a problem with that. And they're getting more competition from there. But I think most of us, and even some of the major better newspapers, have learned to use Google and Facebook to their advantage rather than get used.
Thank you, Simar. So Dr. Kim, what are the latest developments or trends that we should be aware of in terms of transparency of online platforms in the region? Dr. Kim, did you get
Oh, should I go first?
Yes, please.
I'm sorry. So I think we need to pay close attention to how AI technology is being developed. So there is a recent incident that I want to share with all of you. So this instance shows clearly the importance of the ethical guidelines, having an ethical guidelines in designing a service that uses machine learning and AI technology. So ScatterLab is a South Korean AI company that launched an app called Science of Love in 2016. So this app allowed its users to determine whether someone likes you or not by analyzing our messenger conversations from KakaoTalk. So KakaoTalk is the name of the mobile messenger app that pretty much everyone in Korea uses. So about 90% of the population uses KakaoTalk. So based off on the conversation submitted by the users of Science Love app, ScatterLab created an AI chatbot service named Iruda in December last year. So Iruda, as you can see on the slide, was designed as a 20-year-old female college student. So the company claimed that they designed the chatbot as a 20-year-old female because its target audience was teenagers and young adults. Anyhow, chatbot Iruda quickly regained popularity and held conversations with more than 750,000 users in the first couple of weeks. Well, problems started to occur within 2 weeks of Iruda's service launch. First, there was a problem of hate speech. Iruda started using abusive languages towards certain social groups, such as LGBTQ, people with disability, and feminists, and things like that. Second, some users exchanged the sexually explicit comments with Iruda, kind of like sexually harassing the chatbot. And third, Iruda began exposing people's names, nicknames, and home addresses in its responses. So all of these problems occurred because the Scalar Lab, the company who developed this chat service, had not fully removed or filtered inappropriate languages like intimate and sexual conversations, personal and sensitive information from the data set. So after confronting huge criticism from the public, the company had to shut down its chatbot service. So if you want to know more about Iruda's service, please look at a writing published in the Slate magazine early this month. And Zhang pointed out that this incident highlights the general trend of the AI industry, where individuals have little control over how their personal information is processed and used once collected. So I mentioned earlier that the app Science of Love was launched in 2016. So users of the app submitted their conversation log to the Scalar Lab, and they thought their conversation would be used only for determining if someone likes them or not. But the company didn't stop there. The company used the data set for a new chatbot service they were preparing. So once you give your personal information, there's kind of no taking back. So users losing control over their personal information is not an issue that only happens at a small startup company. In most cases, we don't really know how tech companies use all sorts of data that they collect about us. So the case of Iruda also shows that the AI industry and tech companies should pay special attention to ethical guidelines when designing algorithms. So here's an example. Kakao announced its algorithm ethics in 2018. It was the first company to do so in South Korea. The company said it is committed to the fair and ethical development of algorithm with integrity. So the first version of Kakao algorithm ethics had 5 principles, and now it has 7. So among them, the second principle, highlighted in red color on this slide, emphasize the fact that algorithms should not generate a biased result. This is something Scalar Lab developers should have had in mind. So when I talked about Iruda uttering abusive and offensive comments towards certain minority groups, some of you might have come to think of the AI chatbot service named Tay, created by Microsoft. So Microsoft also had to shut down Tay only 16 hours after its service launch, because it began posting offensive tweets. So if companies developing AI technology do not make a conscious effort to avoid existing biases and discrimination, output generated by AI will replicate biases and discrimination. And the 5th principle of Kakao algorithm ethics, also highlighted in red color on this slide, is directly relevant to transparency issue. Online platforms should provide explanation on algorithms to gain users' trust. That explanation should be clear and easy to understand. So that's something that I really wanted to emphasize with a recent example from Korea. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Kim. Please, Sima, and please keep short because we have less time. Thank you.
I've lost track of the question. I'm sorry. What was the question?
What are the latest development or trends that we should be aware of in terms of transparency in online platform in the region?
Well, I think all these online guys have to come and have to be made accountable. Somebody had asked earlier that what can the ordinary person do, and the ordinary citizen has to put out a blitz and actually exert as much pressure as we can so that they are transparent and they make the algorithms transparent. Right now, they are only responsible, like I pointed out earlier, to the governments, and they're only responding when the governments twist their feet. But otherwise, it's not something that they're doing as a matter of course. This has to become part of their functioning. Transparency along with ethics and responsibility. Without that, they become a big corporate who has the ability to create complete conflict and support conflict across the world without being held accountable.
Thank you, Sima. And I also see one more question from audience, but I bet some of our speakers already talked some about this point. And since our time is almost over, so I would like to invite both of our speakers to make final recommendations for this session, that what can we do to improve the transparency of online platforms in the region. Please keep it short, like 2 minutes each. Dr. Kim?
Okay, the final message, the takeaway message that I want to share with the audience. I really want to emphasize the fact that we need to be aware of the bias in algorithm. And we also need to ask for a clear explanation from the online platform companies, what they are doing and under what standard, and what's the specific examples that, when they apply their content policy. The second thing that I want to, second message that I want to share with the audience is we need to make a conscious effort as individual consumer of the information, that we need to break out of our filter bubble, like comfort zone, and then diversify our online world by like reading news directly from the news sites that online platforms do not recommend to you, and try to, have some different point of view from your own. So that's kind of the final message.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kim. And please, Ms. Sima.
Well, as a journalist, I'll only say that we've got to write far more on it. We've got to speak about it. We've got to carry videos on it. We've got to launch a campaign. And I'm very, very happy to notice that more and more journalists are informing themselves about these online platforms, simply because we are getting hurt and hit most. Either we are getting hurt and hit by them, or we are getting hurt and hit by those who bring in laws which contain us and don't contain the online platforms at the end of the day. So we should be writing and informing the people as much as we can. That's all I can say as a journalist.
Thank you so much, Sima. And thank you so much for both speakers for the very insightful words. And thanks all participants. I would like to hand over the next session to Joanne. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Joanne. Thank you so much to the former previous speakers for such interesting discussions. And now I'm Joanne. I'm an advisor for the Center for Independent Journalism in Malaysia, and we are an NGO that work on media freedom, freedom of expression, and freedom of information. And today we will be discussing—
Recording stopped.
For the next 45 minutes, the session on strengthening media and information literacy capacities in a time of disinformation and hate speech. And I think we heard previously from the other speakers about how there is proliferation of misinformation and disinformation on the internet and social media. And sometimes this combines with hate speech. And with the reach of the internet, this can create dangerous situations in real life for vulnerable societies. And disinformation also threatens good journalism. If we are faced with an environment now where sometimes the disinformation is believed as true, while the fact-checked news from credible news agencies is disbelieved and labeled by powerful political leaders as fake news. So how do we combat this, and what is the role of media and information literacy in countering disinformation and hate speech? So today we have with us two very experienced speakers to speak about these topics. One, Ms. Ika Ningtyas, who is a fact checker with Tempo in Indonesia and the Secretary General of the Alliance of Independent Journalists of Indonesia, or AJI. And she's a journalist with 10 years of experience and focusing on environmental issues, human rights, corruption, and digital rights. And we also have from Thailand, Mr. Ray Wang, and he's a lecturer at the Faculty of Journalism at Thammasat University, and he has conducted many courses and workshops, including with UNESCO on media literacy and misinformation. And he's also a PhD candidate in sustainable leadership at Mahidol University. So to open the discussion, perhaps I could ask Ika first. What do you think are the most important issues in the Asia-Pacific region on media and information literacy? Is it on mute?
You can hear my voice now?
Yes, now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Sorry. Okay, thank you. Hey, everyone, and also for UNESCO team, thank you for having me as a speaker in the important panel. And okay, I think the COVID-19 pandemic make the presence of credible information even more needed by the public. I believe the situation in Asia Pacific and also from Indonesia is experienced by many other countries. We already that the infodemic tsunami amid low digital literacy of the community is a serious challenge to deal with the pandemic in Indonesia. The impact is that many people ignore health protocol, increase xenophobia, and
recording in progress.
Refuse to get vaccine. Misleading information doesn't only come from citizens or certain ideological groups such as the anti-vaccine movement, but the statement of a public figure who are anti-science and the media who click bait on the first also accelerate misinformation. In a crisis situation like this, the presence of an independent and science-based media is increasingly important, but independent media face a lot of beating during the pandemic. The media business collapsed so that many journalists lost their jobs, and journalists also face increasing violence. In addition, the transparency of information from the government is quite low. This is what makes my organization, IG, for the last 2 years, work hard enough to strengthen the media and give digital literacy in dealing with misinformation. And we have many fact-check training for the newsroom, train more than 1,000 journalists, workshop for more than 12,000 students and young generation, and involve lecture as fact-check trainers. During the pandemic, we also create more than a series of webinar for the public and attended by more than 50,000 students. This webinar content how the public can distinguish fact or fake news, and recently we also create a guidebook for journalists and how to refute conspiracy theories and pseudoscience, and also how to cover the COVID-19 vaccine. Yeah, this is indeed not a job that can be completed quickly, and we can see the result in one day. It's been a need long struggle for us, and we need more collaboration with many lecture in university, young people, and also with the community in every region in Asia Pacific. I think how to we can together to strengthen media to fight against the misinformation. Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you. And next, Ray.
Thank you, Joanne. So I'm going to try to keep this short, but just talk about a few key issues that come up a lot in kind of my courses that I'm trying to teach here. So let me just share my screen real quick. So one of the key things that I want to keep asking everyone, and this should be a floating around question for everyone, is why is it that we have laws against misinformation and disinformation, and yet we still have problems with it? I was talking with actually one of my consultant friends, Mr. David Young, who also works at UNESCO, and he compared the current info pandemic that we're facing right now to the Hydra from Greek mythology. Now, if you all are not familiar with Greek mythology, the Hydra was a monster that no matter how many times you thought you cut off the head of the beast, it would just grow back. And that's very similar to kind of the issues that we're facing right now. Just when we think we've basically done away with disinformation and hate speech, it pops back up. There are different people all over the world that are sharing fake news and misinformation. So it comes down to really the key question for me is, as an educator, I'm always thinking about what are we doing to educate not just the students right now in university, but also the public on these important issues. So I think that information literacy, to kind of combat this, we can consider ourselves, of course, an information-rich society. We cannot, however, consider ourselves necessarily at this point an information literate society. I don't think that any of the panelists here would say that we are all information literate at this point. Although we are information rich, we are not necessarily all information literate. And there are a couple different key issues that we need to keep in mind. One of the first things is, what are we sharing and why are we sharing it? One of the first things that we have to keep in mind is that when we share information, is there an intent behind it? Are we trying to advocate someone to believe our position? Or are we simply trying to have a dialogue? I think that one of the key things that we've forgotten is that we need to still be able to talk to each other. So how we can go about making sure that we don't just get the information, that misinformation, disinformation, hate speech is all wrong. We all know this, of course. But how do we get this kind of knowledge and this kind of understanding through to the other people? Because it's not just knowledge that we're trying to address here. We're trying to address a behavior not just for the people who are well educated, but also the behavior of people who are in the public, who have not had the privilege of being able to go to university and know about these issues. So how do we address this education issue? Because everyone deserves to have information literacy training. But how we do this doesn't necessarily have to just go through education. And it also, and I will emphasize this as well, should not also be coming just through the journalists. We can't just look at the journalists to be educating everyone. This is a whole collaborative effort, as you've been hearing from the last few sessions here. Research has indicated that news and misinformation is likely to be shared by emotional responses. So where does our frustration come from? Where does the anger come from? Do we really understand why people are sharing the news that they are doing? Are we just getting angry and complaining about it to our friends, or are we trying to contribute to a global dialogue, a regional, a national, and a global dialogue on how we should be addressing these issues? Because all of this comes from communication. And I emphasize to students all the time, just because you post something does not mean people are listening. We have to go back, and part of information literacy is listening, not just gathering all the information that suits our needs and what we believe, but listening to other sides and other viewpoints, even from those that don't agree with us. That's a fundamental part of information literacy, beyond, of course, the fact checking that is also important. Are we seeing the big picture? One interesting thing here in Thailand is that when COVID hit, the second wave came, you would see comments like you saw below. Whenever you see a Myanmar people, shoot them down is something that was actually posted on social media. And what was the response? You know, there were no arrests. There were a lot of similar posts to that. So how are we addressing these issues of hate speech? Because although we don't necessarily address issues of hate speech in that context, we do address fake news and COVID. We are arresting people now who are sharing fake news about COVID. But how are we really helping people to understand? Because in the story, in that clip that I show you there, the woman who shared the news said that she was just trying to inform her friends. She had no idea of how to fact check, of how to do any of these things. So how are we spreading out the knowledge? I would suggest that it's not just about a workshop. I would suggest that we have to talk more about other activities, maybe even public campaigns, in fact, that allow us to spread the knowledge, not just necessarily teach it in a workshop and assume that everyone else is going to get the same information and knowledge that we do from these workshops. We need to expand it farther. How do we educate and nudge people to be more reflective and less reactionary? one common fact is that people don't share misinformation and fake news if they have that reflection element to them, if they're thinking before they are sharing. But a lot of people, they kind of cater to their emotional response, and they don't even know the consequences of sharing fake news, misinformation, or hate speech because they are reactionary. They don't reflect. So how do we nudge people rather than force people through policies and laws and actions to understand this? Prior knowledge is also very important in terms of helping people understand not to share fake news or say hate speech online and even in person. So how do we go about getting this knowledge, not just to those who can pay for it, but making sure that it is, and I view information literacy as a global right that everyone should have an opportunity to learn about and learn from. So how can we get these conversations going so that we're nudging people without having to force people to think more about information literacy? And most importantly, and I'm going to wrap it up by saying, how can we all work together? You know, we emphasize on democracies, but as you've all seen from all over the world, democracies aren't functioning because we're just not talking to one another. People are getting mad at both sides. People, instead of talking to someone who they disagree with, are instead going and looking for someone who just simply supports their views and their opinions. So how do we get people to come out of their kind of filter bubbles, information bubbles? And having those conversations is the other key part of information literacy that we sometimes may not talk so much about. The fact that someone has to be willing to come out and have those hard conversations about things that they don't agree about. Because really, what we're trying to get down to is peaceful discovery, because as we are studying, I study sustainability. Sustainability is not an easy thing to solve or address. So we need to have peaceful discovery. We need to know what has worked in the past. We need to provide people information, allow them to access information to find out what we have already been doing in the past and how we can be better in the future. We can't do that if both sides, people, businesses, governments, everyone is trying to attack each other and trying to discredit each other. So how we can form a collaborative network that is the real key to having real information literacy is the most important thing. Dialogue and discussion. So how we can go about stimulating dialogue and discussion, not just with people we like or people who agree with our views, but also the people who we don't like or who have views that we vehemently disagree with. How we include those voices, how we thoughtfully listen to all voices in the conversation is the fundamental part that we have to remember about information literacy. So I hope that we can have a few more kind of discussions about how we can stimulate dialogue and discussion. And I'm going to end my first talk there to go back into our questions. So I pass it back to Joanne.
Thank you so much, Ray and Ika, for that very comprehensive introduction. Now, Ray gave some examples already of some disinformation that was prevalent, and Ika also spoke about disinformation about the pandemic and vaccines. So before we go into how media literacy can help combat that, maybe you could talk to us about some of the latest developments or trends that we should be aware of in terms of disinformation and hate speech in the region, some of the horror stories, so to speak, and some of the worst excesses that have been perpetuated in recent times. Maybe Ray can go first this time.
Sure. So I think that what we're seeing is that, you know, there is, just by that example, we're seeing that there is kind of a conflict and a disagreement because we still are trying to emphasize, I think, especially here in Thailand, we have selective free speech. So you can't freely speak about anything, but sometimes, like, you can speak freely about certain topics and issues, as we found out when second wave hit, and of course, it was linked to a couple of Burmese immigrants, and of course, it spread like wildfire. So one of the key things that we're trying to address right now is that how do we kind of set these kind of social norms and mores around, you know, people discussing about these issues, because there was so much kind of visceral and kind of hate speech being kind of thrown towards the Burmese people. And everyone was trying to tell them, you know, that's not true, that's not accurate. But I think one of the other key issues is that we are thinking very simplistically. When I notice that when we're thinking in a linear way, we're not trying to understand and think that there are more layers to this issue. We tend to end up promoting very simple solutions or very simple answers to actual complicated problems. And information literacy, and I'll kind of wrap it up there, but information literacy is about helping everyone understand, both young and old, that things are complicated. We've got to do our research, we've got to do our diligence, and most importantly, we have to talk to people. We can't just go on with kind of our own thoughts or beliefs. We always have to check. And through checking, we come to a conversation and discussion. So that's something that admittedly we're not doing enough of. You know, we're trying to fight misinformation and disinformation and hate speech with all these laws, but I think we all need to come to some kind of a discussion about what exactly it is that we should stop, what kind of speech we should ban, but what speech should we allow? And because it's a very slippery slope, I must say. Once you start regulating one form of speech, well, where do you stop? So I think that we're at the point of trying to navigate that slippery slope. So that's my take on that question.
Thank you. We also in Malaysia had problems with disinformation about refugees and undocumented migrants and all sorts of migrants and xenophobia in general. And that was very difficult to combat as well. Ika, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, since January when Indonesia started vaccination, disinformation about vaccine has increased quite rapidly. Misinformation that the vaccine is lethal or fitted with chips has been widely shared on social media. As one of the countries with a large Muslim population, the issue is haram. Is also very popular. Haram is a term in Islam that says something is prohibited from being consumed or included in the body because it contains substances that are prohibited in Islam, such as used by pork, like that. In the rubella vaccine in 3 years ago, the issue of haram vaccine was quite influential in people receiving the vaccine. But this issue can be praised gradually after the Indonesian Ulama Council issued a certificate that the Sinovac vaccine is halal. And even so, misinformation has spread far, and there is a phenomenon that some group of people are hesitant to accept the vaccine. I think the main problem about the vaccine and also about the infodemic is how we have allowed about the sign of literacy. Because you know the science is very limited resource from the common people, and not much of people can understand how we can to understand the credible journal like that or credible scientists papers like that. So information about vaccine and also about the health issue is very difficult to understand with the public. So it's very big challenging for the media and also journalists how to create the article and how to disseminate the article can understanding for the public and reader. Yeah, we can use maybe with the interactive video or illustration, interactive illustration to get the audience can understand with how the science can work about this vaccine or health issue others.
Thank you so much. Well, my next question would be, well, first to Ray. So does media, as we can see, the consequences of disinformation can be really serious. You know, people not getting vaccines or people becoming violent against certain groups of vulnerable populations. So does media information and literacy work as a countermeasure against disinformation and hate speech? And then maybe Ika, if you could take some of the questions coming in. And even if it does work, how does it work when, you know, there are certain parts of the population that you will not be able to reach, for example, where internet connection is limited or even censored, you know. So how useful is it as a tool if it cannot get out there, so to speak? So Ray first and then Ika.
Yeah, be honest, Aji don't have comprehensive research about that's good or better than the years before, but based on the literacy index from the government, the scale of the Indonesian literacy just in the medium scale. So I think it's very, very challenging for us how we can increasingly for the literacy of the public. Yeah, you know, since 2 years ago, Aji had a special material for journalists to do fact check and for students. And the other hand, many civil society organization currently specialists providing digital literacy to society. I think this is a good development because in some universities and urban societies, the issue of disinformation is quite popular at the moment. And also we have more than 20 media have a special channel for fact checking. And yeah, we are very helpful for audience to bring them how to can difference for facts or the mis or disinformation. But the challenge is Indonesia has more than 500 districts and more than 75,000 villages, and not all digital literacy training can reach all the villages, and access to information between villages and the cities is still quite unequal in Indonesia. Moreover, we have many local language that can be approached, but not much that can be done. Yeah, so far I think we have more than collaborate with the community and young people to answer this challenge until now, Joanne.
Thank you. Ray?
I think that's a great point that you made, but I think that it also leads back to kind of the key point that I'm trying to make is, I think we got to go beyond like just simply publicizing events, publishing reports, doing workshops. And I think what we need to do is do a better job of looking at exactly what areas are we reaching, especially for the workshops. Like we've done so many workshops on misinformation and fake news in Thailand, but for a lot of the universities, they kind of sometimes centralize around the Bangkok area. It's just easier logistically, but I think that what we also need to think about is, okay, who are we serving really here? Are we really just working with Bangkok, or are we reaching out to the other areas of Thailand? Because one of the key things, and I think this goes back to Ika's point, is that we have to look at, okay, where have we done these events? Where have we published and disseminated these materials? Have people actually used them? So I think that before we even start to think about like effectiveness and why are people still doing this and why is there still kind of this misinformation problem, I think we have to go back and look at who's really listening. Kind of goes back to it. Listening is not just a matter of, you know, having a bunch of people say that they loved your event or your workshop. It's also about, okay, who have we actually served here in our country? Who are we leaving out? Are they able to access it easily? How else can we really kind of provide these materials to them? And sometimes I think that we do have to just sometimes agree that, you know, it helps to have a workshop out in the middle of nowhere, Thailand. You know, it helps to kind of disseminate those materials, but it also helps, more importantly, is to have and find that role model in those areas, because we have to understand that, you know, we all know what the issues are. But for many of the people, they're not going to listen until you get that right influencer or right role model who comes from that community speaking to them about these issues. So we can do a much better job, I think, of just co-opting and volunteering people from all of these different regions to be our spokesmen. Like, of course, we don't just pick them because they come from a diverse range of countries, but I think that is another initiative we can do. Find those role models, find those influencers, find those people who know how that community reacts to information, know how to communicate in such a way that the community is going to listen and be willing to have a conversation. So we can involve more people here. And, you know, with the workshops, we don't need to just look at number. We need to look at where those workshops and those trainings have been done and who are we missing right now. We need to map out where the information is going and how we can get the information to those areas where it hasn't reached yet. So that's my take on that.
Thank you. So maybe if you could explain more, how does media and information literacy actually help to counter disinformation? You know, how, I mean, sometimes you can train me for today, but I might forget it tomorrow, you know. How does it help to change behavior, so to speak? What are the tools that you give to people, and what kinds of activities are conducted, and what are the challenges? I think it's one of the questions as well from the audience. Ray, maybe, yeah.
I'll start first. So I think what we have to understand is there's no easy way to measure this, okay? We can't just give a knowledge test. I've given knowledge tests to my students. They do well on that test. Then I ask them the next year, do you remember what I told you? They said, no, what'd you say? So we have to go beyond just simple testing measures. Testing is, of course, a great indicator. I'm not saying we don't do that, but I'm saying that we have to look into, you know, making sure that people don't know they're being evaluated. One of the biggest challenges I have is when people know they're being evaluated, they're paying attention, they're taking notes, they're trying to, you know, memorize exactly what I told them. But as you said, information literacy is not a knowledge thing, it's a mindset thing. And I think it harkens back to kind of a key point that I was mentioning, is that we got to get people to think complexify their thinking, okay? Sometimes we think that we need to make things easier for people to understand. Yeah, that's a great way to get them interested, but if we want to get to that next level of kind of understanding of what information literacy is, we can't be worried about dumbing down our content. And we have to be finding new ways of seeing, are people really going through those kind of inherent steps that nobody talks about, of course? Are they going through those inherent steps to checking, is the information reliable? What other questions do we really have? So going beyond knowledge is the main thing. Trying to find new ways to assess, are we really seeing that mindset take form and seeing them replicate that mindset no matter what they do? That's really where the key is, going beyond the knowledge now and going more towards assessing, has that mindset really set in, or do we still have some more work to do? So yeah, beyond knowledge, that's my take.
Thanks. And Ika, how does media information literacy help in countering disinformation?
Yeah, I think the role of media is now is far better than the years before, because a lot of media in Indonesia have a special channel for fact checking. So it's very helpful for the public. If they want to know about some misinformation, they just to input some keywords on Google, and they will read about some article, fact check article from the media. I think the development is very better for now, and I'm glad with the awareness of the media, how to handle of the misinformation. Yeah, but in other hand, I'm very shocked now about the recently research from the government that the trust of online media is just only 7%. Then how they believe with social media, and the number in more than 20%. Oh, it's very big gap for the believing of the public. And so it's very big homework for us, for my organization, how to can have the exactly strategic for the public to increase the digital literacy, but also we can encourage the government can bring the digital literacy in the formal education for the young generation, because I think without the teach in the formal education, the digital literacy is very slowly to development in our society. As I mentioned before that, Indonesia have more than 75,000 villages in Indonesia, so it's very challenging just for organization to reach all the villages. So we need the government have a big responsibility to bring this problem is very serious for our future.
Yes, I think one of the questions that has been asked is how do you tackle grassroots spread of misinformation in small communities? I think you've kind of answered that a little bit, but anything to add to that? You know, it could have a really big impact in a very small community, but they could be very remote. So how do you tackle that?
Yeah, indeed, Joan, is the homework for our organization now and also for other civil society in Indonesia.
So maybe if you could provide an example of any media and information literacy initiatives in your where you work or in the region, either one of you.
I'll start. So as part of my Communication for Developing Societies course, I have students actually do a misinformation campaign in which they're trying to reach out to public. So they have to do outreach. They have to find influencers to get their message out. They have to think of different content in order for them to be able to just see the challenge of how difficult it is to educate a public on a very important issue. And I will say that one of the key challenges here is just from my perspective, since I work mainly with undergraduate students, is I need them to kind of see how big the challenge is. It's not just simply you put out like a nice printed book about misinformation and then distribute it to all your friends and think that now you've solved misinformation. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to extend now the education and our understanding of how we like communicate this important information. I'm doing my small part, like I would like to, of course, replicate this model across many different universities and all across the country. But I think it starts with people not taking for granted or, well, not taking for granted the fact that, you know, information dissemination, getting people just to click and download or even like and share your post is hard. And if we're going to start to get these conversations and get everyone involved, you got to start thinking about how are we communicating to people about these issues, because everyone is going to see this post. And I told my students this during the project. Yeah, they will see your post and they will agree with you, but are they going to engage with your post? Because they used to have text and text of information. And then they were starting to wonder, like, why are nobody liking our posts? I said to them, well, what's that unique angle? How are you presenting your information? Because a lot of the times we may get kind of preoccupied with the fact that we were accurate. We presented all the information there. But presentation is everything here in this digital age. If you don't present something in the right way, and I think journalists, I really commend journalists for trying to do the work now. The important work now is you're trying to get people's attention, because when we don't get the attention, when people think that there are simple solutions to very complex problems, that's when we really start to notice that journalism is really valuable. So really the key thing that I'm trying to work on, and the initiative I'm trying to work on in my small part with my students, is just understanding. It's not just about all the great information that you've learned from me. It's about how you present it to the public and understanding when the public reacts to what you're doing, but most importantly, when does the public not react? And then re-experimenting, reshuffling, trying to do new things. Like this kind of iterative process is not just great for creating new products, it's great for thinking about how we get more conversations out there about this important issue and how to address it. Even in those grassroots communities, that's what I eventually want to get into, is how do we ensure that we are serving everyone in this regard? So it's not just about information, it's also about your presentation. And are you doing all the kinds of things that you need to do to get that engagement online, since that's really where we all are now. So that's kind of the key thing. Just understanding that information is the foundation, but it's not the key to getting more information literacy out there.
Right, so trying it out is really important, and figuring it out how information works once it's out there. Ika.
Yeah, we also have a problem about internet infrastructure in Indonesia. There are no region have the same good quality for the internet connection. So some villages until now not have good the internet access like that. So it's a very influencing how we can to disseminate about the fact check article. Yeah, so Aji on the collaboration with some universities and also train the student, and again we need their role can be an agent in every small group and their families and also with their village, so they can bring the issue, disinformation issue is also fact check project in Indonesia, bring to small community in every region in Indonesia. Yeah, and also we need how the public figure in the villages level or community level can influencing the society. And also the another problem how we can to tackle this information in WhatsApp, because you know WhatsApp is a very private conversations like that. Yeah, and some media and organization have created is like a WhatsApp channel for the public. They can access to update every day about the misinformation and how the fact check article.
Right, yes, I think we need a fact checker in every family WhatsApp group, that's for sure. That sounds like a good idea. Well, we have about 5 minutes more, so I'm just going to ask a wrap-up question of what is one takeaway that you would like all of us to have today? So maybe one thing we can all do starting today. Ika, maybe you can go first.
Yeah, I know every people here have main and important role in every community itself, and this be a social model for our country, how to give tackle the misinformation. And I know we need the collaboration more and more with student university in also across the region in Asia Pacific. So please, from this session, also we can start for other collaboration to give a solution for other country. And I know it's a very long struggle for us, and this is a important message for the event, how we can provide the good information for public wider. Thank you, Johan.
Thank you, Ika. And Ray?
So in terms of this education, I want us to think about how can we not be so formal in our operations of these education. So how can we not become so formalized in terms of how we educate people, and how do we ensure that the education programs, workshops, seminars, campaigns are as inclusive as possible? I think that what we've seen from misinformation and fake news is that there's a very few amount of people who are being deliberately malicious in their intent in sharing fake news and misinformation. So I think we've got to be careful about not blaming people, because once you start blaming and once you start that negative feeling, the whole thing gets negative. And then when you're serving or trying to serve an underprivileged community that doesn't have all this background or prior knowledge, they will stop listening to you. So the important thing is that we don't seek out overly formal routes of education, but we also make sure that the education process that we're taking on is as inclusive and as positive as possible, and not assuming the worst in people and assuming that people are trying to share fake news because they are evil people. That's never a really productive way of going about making sure that more people, as many people as possible, are information literate as possible. So making sure that we look at all the different ways we can educate. We don't always need those workshops and seminars, though they're great. We should continue them, but looking for other ways to do it, and also making sure that our kind of ways of education are more towards positive, inclusive kind of environments, not ones in which we ask people why they shared that fake news or accusing them of it. So we can take a bit of tact in making sure that we include them and making sure that they feel like, yeah, I can do this. It's not so difficult. So that's my key takeaway on how we promote better information literacy, not just among those who can pay for it, but also among everyone, since everyone, I think, deserves to have access to information literacy education. So thank you, Joanne.
Thank you so much, both to Ika and to Ray, for a great discussion and giving us a lot of things to think about. And I'm glad to hear that there are all these initiatives going on in the region. And now I'm going to hand the time back to Ming Kwok from UNESCO to conclude this session. I think there's one more event. Yes. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Vicheka. Thank you, Amalia, and to all our speakers today. That was certainly very, very educational for me, and I believe to a lot of our audience as well. And just a good segue from Ray's last intervention, and speaking about being positive and being inclusive, and how we can get more engagement and more discussion on media and information literacy. We have a special presentation on the outcome of the 2020, last year's Global Media Information Literacy Week Conference and the Youth Forum. And to present this initiative to us, we have Ms. Yong-Eun Kim, Director of Communication of the Korean National Commission for UNESCO. And Ms. Kim, if you are ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ming, for giving me the floor. I'm very excited to share the outcome of the 2020 Global Media and Information Literacy Week feature conference with you all today. Let me just share my screen. Okay. The Republic of Korea and UNESCO co-organized the feature conference last year online in October under the theme Resisting Disinfodemic, MIL for everyone and by everyone. Professor Jenkins of the University of Southern California joined us as the keynote speaker. Professor Jenkins, a prominent media scholar, well known for his book Convergence Culture, gave a presentation on how participatory culture has shifted the focus of literacy from individual expression to community involvement. He said media literacy is the way to support youth participatory culture and collective intelligence, and mentioned some achievements of media literate youth, such as Greta Thunberg and the K-pop fans. We had 9 more sessions and on the topics of democracy, lifelong learning, equality, youth participation, curriculum, and a by design approach. And all these sessions proved to be insightful and elicited active participation from the audience. Around 1,000 people from 83 countries registered for the event, and on average 300 people joined each session. We had speakers from academia, social media platforms, libraries, regulators, civil society, and youth leaders from different regions. All sessions were live streamed virtually and will actually remain accessible until this year's Global MIL Week Feature Conference. So if you would like to watch any of the 2020 conference, Please visit either the UNESCO official website or the virtual conference hall website at gmail2020.com. Now let me introduce the Seoul Declaration. The culmination and outcome of the 2020 Global MIL Week was the adoption of the Seoul Declaration. The Seoul Declaration is especially meaningful since it is the first declaration on MIL after the Global Media and Information Literacy Week was officially declared at the 40th session of the UNESCO General Conference. And it reaffirms the importance of MIL in the unprecedented circumstances in which we find ourselves, not just as a result of COVID pandemic, but also the disinfodemic, which the pandemic has exacerbated and which has had a severe impact on people's lives. The Seoul Declaration emphasized the contribution that MIL can make to access to information, freedom of expression, prevention of violent extremism, combating hate speech, and the achievement of sustainable development goals. So it calls upon various stakeholders to play their roles in promoting media and information literacy, including government, civil society, media researchers, and UN agencies. Lastly, I would like to talk about the promotional activities. To promote the videos, no, not the video, to promote the events and the importance of media and information literacy in general, we produced a series of promotional videos featuring Erin Nam, the Korean-American K-pop star, who served as the global ambassador for MIL. And thanks to the active collaboration of UNESCO regional offices, the videos were a huge success. They were liked over 19,000 times and viewed over 137,000 times. And the Korean National Commission for UNESCO also collaborated with some famous cartoon artists here in Korea, like the ones pictured on the slide, to share the concept and importance of media and information literacy through social media channels. So we realized the importance of working with influencers to spread our message, and so we plan to launch further promotional campaigns annually with famous figures in the region to draw more people's attention. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share the outcome of last year's conference with you. The conference served as a global forum to revisit the importance of MIL, and the Republic of Korea was happy to contribute. So we look forward to your continued support and interest in this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kim. We do encourage everyone to use the videos and the materials produced by the National Commission because they are very well-made resources, and we hope that you can use it as a very good icebreaker when you are discussing the issue of media and information literacy. Thank you, Ms. Kim, again. So now we have come to the end of our program, and we would like to invite our rapporteur for today, which is Ms. Therese Torres, the Director for Research Policy and Advocacy Unit for AIJC based in Manila, to provide a summary of today's discussion. For your information as well, Ms. Torres has also kindly agreed to present the report on behalf of all of us from the Asia Pacific Group at the session of World Press Freedom Day on the 3rd of May as the Regional Rapporteur for Asia Pacific. So with my thanks, and I'll give my time to Ms. Therese. The time is yours.
Thank you very much, Ming. It is my honor to give a summary of the key points from our distinguished speakers in the 3 in-depth and invigorating moderated discussions. As moderator, Ms. Amalia Cabusao emphasized in the first session, journalists are increasingly working under precarious conditions, with media facing the risk of being captured by political, economic, and ideological powers. And even in seemingly optimal conditions for journalism, such as in New Zealand, some threats remain. And these, as Dr. Peter Thompson pointed out, should not be taken for granted. Dr. Thompson identified 3 spheres where problems have emerged: state, market, and civil society. In New Zealand, the number of journalists over the last decade has increased, and the newspaper sector has lost about 75% of its share in advertising spend. Consumers are embracing entertainment over public service media content. It also appears that consumers have not been critical of misinformation, and they have not been careful about sharing their data. He emphasized the need to ask more critical questions about how online platforms use our data, and he noted the need to work and try to identify where the opportunities are to push for public interest journalism. On the other hand, all eyes are on Myanmar now, and Mr. Sue Win shared that apart from the shutdown of independent news and the arrest of journalists amid military rule, another concern in Myanmar is the rising racism and racial and religious narrow-mindedness. Given this situation, Mr. Sue Win noted that newsrooms must make sure to approach the news from the broader perspectives of humanity and the truth. He underlined the importance of following the fundamental principles of journalism, including ensuring accuracy. But at the same time, he noted the importance of providing context. He said that apart from reporting the truth, it is the responsibility of the media to report issues in the proper context and perspective. Both speakers agreed on the need for public service media that is supported by the state but completely independent from state influence. In session 2, moderator Ms. Vicheka Khan underlined how many people remain in the dark about the inner workings of online platforms and the flow of problematic content such as disinformation and hate speech. While there have been efforts to counter these, much research still needs to be done to assess their effectiveness as well as the proportion of such harmful content in relation to the volumes of content, its origins, and its reach. Ms. Sima Mustafa proposes that the solution lies in having worldwide, regional, and nationwide policies which all ensure accountability and bring in a system of ethics that no platform can violate. She noted that there should be zero tolerance for hate, intimidation, and abuse, and these policies should be created by citizens involving multiple stakeholders from different sectors in order to restore some level of order and protect and strengthen rights. Dr. Min Jung Kim emphasized the need for ethical guidelines in machine learning and AI technology amid emerging issues surrounding apps where hate speech and abuse have been detected. Ms. Sima also highlighted the role of journalists in educating the public about these issues. And Dr. Kim said that noted the importance of demanding for transparency from online platform companies about their policies and their application, as well as the need to increase public awareness about bias in algorithms and the public's consciousness about diversifying media consumption, breaking out of their filter bubble. And in session 3, moderator Ms. Joanne Ding emphasized the critical role of media and information literacy, or MIL, in protecting and promoting information as a public good. Empowering citizens with MIL provides a long-term response to disinformation and hate speech, as this translates to information-resilient citizens who have an appreciation for and trust in the free press, while remaining critical and discerning media and information consumers and producers. Ms. Ika Ningtyas described the problems faced by the media in Indonesia amid the pandemic, such as the collapse of media businesses. Journalists have lost their jobs, and there are also journalists who face increasing violence. Moreover, journalists face challenges related to misinformation, false information, even from public figures. This is why organizations like the Alliance of Independent Journalists of Indonesia are working hard to strengthen the media and provide media literacy and fact-checking training. to equip journalists with the competencies they need to deal with misinformation. She noted that collaborations between media and students or universities are also necessary to help find solutions. Dr. Ray Wang raised thought-provoking questions, one of which was, how can we educate and nudge people to be more reflective and less reactionary? He asked what educators are doing to educate not only students, but the public on misinformation. He pointed out the importance of not only fact-checking, but also listening to different viewpoints, which means there should be more conversations on things people do not necessarily agree on. Dr. Ray Wang also emphasized the importance of going beyond formal education programs and ensuring that MIL programs and campaigns are as inclusive as possible. He said we need to be careful about not blaming people or assuming the worst in people, and that MIL education should be inclusive and positive and should stimulate dialogue and discussion. With that, the Asia Pacific Regional Forum for World Press Freedom Day has achieved its purpose, generating ideas, good practices, sharing good practices, and sparking discussions regarding the sub-themes of World Press Freedom Day, including media viability, transparency of online platforms, and media and information literacy. The work continues, and we look forward to more exchanges and collaborations as we tackle these issues across the region. Thank you very much. Back to you, Ming.
Thank you so very, very much, Ms. Torres. Thank you very much for the excellent reporting of the session that we have today. And allow me to thank you in advance for your support for the plenary session that will take place on the 3rd of May, this coming Monday. And we do invite all our participants to also continue to join all the other sessions for World Press Freedom Day. There are over 350 speakers from around the world scheduled during these few days. So I'm sure there will be something that will interest you and excite you about the issues of press freedom and freedom of expression and access to information. Finally, allow me to invite my colleague, Ms. Misako Ito, who is the Advisor for Communication and Information of UNESCO's office in Bangkok, to say a few words and also to help us close our event for today. Misako, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Ming. And I also would like to join you to congratulate Teresa for the excellent reporting of our debate. I hope we were able to bring a rich exchange of good practices and ideas through this Asia-Pacific Regional Forum to the global debate on the theme of information as a public good. This regional forum is organized to mark the 30th years anniversary of the original Windhoek Declarations. And today, 30 years later, we are convinced that the vision of the Windhoek Declarations to promote professional journalism is still alive and even more relevant than ever to safeguard information as a public good. So while people have more access to information today through the internet, we fail to access to quality information, to think critically, to better communicate and listen to other perspectives. And I would like to draw your attention here to the newly published UNESCO's MIL curriculum for teachers and learners, Think Critically, Click Wisely, the second editions. The second point that we discussed is that our digital information ecosystem has raised concern over the opacity of internet companies, including the algorithm, the use of private data, the flow of data. And this makes the measures to counter disinformation and hate speech impossible. So we need to be aware of the biases of the algorithm and claim for more transparency from the online platform. And final important point was on the viability of media outlets, especially the independent media, which were fragilized by the COVID-19 pandemic, but also because of the political situation in some countries. So this is a critical call to all governments, media development partners, and media industry itself to invest in independent media for information to continue to serve as a public common good. So on this note, and on behalf of UNESCO, let me express my enormous thanks for this very rich debate to try to find out solutions to keep maintaining information as a public good. And these exchanges today are broadcasted live to the main event of World Press Freedom Day, hosted by UNESCO and the government of Namibia, and will feed into the global celebrations. And I should, of course, on behalf of UNESCO, extend my thanks to all the speakers and moderators for their brilliant interventions. I'm sure we can pick up on many of your good ideas to enrich and enlarge our intervention in the future. I would like to thank Ms. Kim from the Korean National Commission for UNESCO for presentation on the outcome of the last year's Global MIL Week. Of course, Therese, as I mentioned it before, for her excellent summary of the debate, and our dear colleague, Ming, Christy, and all the technical team behind the scene from Jakarta to make this event happen, but also to my colleague from Beijing, New Delhi, and other UNESCO offices in Asia. Thanks to the participants for staying with us, thinking alone. Stay tuned and enjoy the rest of celebration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Misako. Let's all turn on our camera and wave to our global audience. So if everybody is on, let's do a quick wave for all the audience around the world. Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.